So, good morning, everyone. If you're in China, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome once again to Jeff, who's joining me today to discuss a few little world events and also a few American phenomenons that we've got going on. Hi, Jeff. How are you going? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. Yeah. Um,
So, you wanted to start with talking
yeah,
about
going all right.
the red note or the TikTok refugees phenomenon. What have you got to tell us about that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I joined up with Red Note as have Zhou as have several million Americans last time I checked.
Mhm.
And I claimed to be a TikTok refugee, even though I just had an account. I didn't really use it, but I've been um, corresponding with people a bit on Red Note and just generally looking around. And an acquaintance of mine online, and I guess his daughter, his 18-year-old daughter, joined it first and talked her dad into it, and
Mm.
so now they're on there. Um, but yeah, it's just been, you know, quite shocking for Americans to find out, oh, our government lied to us about China. Imagine our government lying to us about something. Um, and
Imagine.
so
Tell me this: have you encountered in your time on Xiaohongshu? Have you encountered any negativity about being American?
No, not at all. Other than in a joking manner. Um, you know, some
Other
people
than a
will
joke,
post,
what? How does that manifest itself?
oh, they'll say, oh, we're getting tired of you, English speaking people on here. Why don't you go back home? Or and then they say, just kidding, and then they talk about whatever. Um,
Yeah,
but
I've heard that
yeah,
there's a
it's been.
group. There's a large group in Taiwan. They're known as the 1450, and I've heard that a lot of them are getting on and actually pretending they're in mainland China and being negative and insulting people, so that Americans will get the idea that most Chinese, or some Chinese people at least, are quite rude. But almost everyone that I know here in China is saying this is fantastic. They think it's amazing that you
Yeah,
guys so
yeah,
ill-informed. It really is amazing. All of my
mhm,
friends who are most of my friends are kind of older. They're not on Xiaohongshu, but everybody reads it. Everybody looks at it. Even my wife is she's got a Xiaohongshu account, but she doesn't post on there. But she's reading it and watching things all the time, and so they're all saying, "I can't believe Americans are so stupid." That's really the answer. They can't believe Americans are so stupid. How did that happen?
well, I mean, it's not stupidity; it's just being brainwashed by our government. And
Right.
the ironic thing is that Chinese are realizing, oh, our government. Are you still there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Um,
still here.
okay. Yeah, a lot of Chinese are realizing, oh, our government was telling the truth about how bad America is. you
Yeah,
know.
I don't think Chinese really realized. I mean, there's a lot of. I can remember taking my wife to for the first time in her life to go overseas. We went to Vietnam, and
Mhm.
she was very disappointed that Vietnam was less well developed than Zhongshan, where we live. And I talked
Yeah.
to her about this. I said, "What do you mean? Why is that a disappointment?" She said, "Well, I thought everywhere was better than Zhongshan or better than China. I thought China was really backward." And this is only 15 years ago, maybe a
Mhm.
little more than that, but certainly less than. I've only known her for 18, 19 years, so it's in the last 20 years that she actually believed that China was less well developed than everywhere. And I was surprised myself arriving in China, the shock of arriving in China and finding all the development there 20 years ago. Now, it was still a dirty place. It
Mhm.
was a little bit depressed in some degree, and there was still some bad manners. My perception of bad manners. There was
Yeah.
spitting and littering and stuff like that going on. This
Mhm.
is quite interesting. But yeah, Strine has put a very interesting comment there. This has been an eye opener for both you Asians, US Asians, and
Yeah.
the Chinese. And I think that's possibly true. I think it's
Yeah.
probably been a bit of a watershed moment. Now, the next thing is that they're talking about
Yeah, for
banning
sure.
Xiaohongshu. Do you think
Oh,
that'll
I
happen?
haven't. I mean, there's speculation. I haven't heard anything concrete about that.
Well, it's extremely
I
easy
guess
to
it could
do.
happen.
It's extremely easy to do now because the legislation is in place. The nickname of the legislation is the TikTok ban, but it's not a TikTok
Right.
ban. This is a ban on any adversarial app or platform that the president declares a threat to national security. So now it's
Right.
down to Donald Trump's temperament, which we all know is very stable. So we shouldn't worry too much about that, should we? Yeah, that was a touch of sarcasm.
The
Um,
stable.
stable Trump, I don't think so. But he's doing some very interesting things, and I wanted to focus on for a little while about what he has done since he came to power, since he became the dictator of the United States, which is exactly what he is right now. Um, what's he done? He's done a lot. In your experience, what's happening from your point of view? You're an American living in America. What's going on there?
Well, I mean, he did do one good thing. He, sorry, I got to plug in my computer here. He, apparently, behind the scenes, before he even got into office, negotiated, made the Israelis agree to a ceasefire with Gaza. So that's one good thing. And
Okay.
he, he abolished the changes in Title IX, which is the legislation that opened things up and provided funding for women to have athletic and academic scholarships and so on and so forth, and greatly increased participation in women's sports. And so Biden changed that. So anybody who calls himself a woman can be a woman, and so on and so forth. So that was undermining Title IX, and so Trump undid that. Most of the other stuff he's done is bad, of course, which is not surprising. But I guess he's sending more weapons to Israel, and
just this morning,
we were talking earlier. He wants.
Yeah, Eddie's pointing this out just this morning.
Yeah.
Now, you just mentioned that one of the positive things was organizing the ceasefire. Now, today, Netanyahu is in the White House. He's in Washington today, and they had a joint press briefing, and in it, Trump has said that the United States will own Gaza, and there's only 1.8 million people left there, which means that the place has
why.
Yeah, the place. Well, he's now saying they can go to Egypt or Jordan, and I'm not sure what Egypt and Jordan will have to say about that.
Well,
they
they've
can go to
already said no many times.
Yeah, so this is what he's saying in public today. Last night, our time, your time today, earlier on, and he will take over Gaza, and America will own Gaza. That's his statement this morning.
Yeah, I mean, Israel's been trying for 15 months, and all they can manage to do is kill civilians. They aren't gonna, you back? Okay.
Yeah, I'm back.
I don't know why we're having these technical issues. Yeah, I mean, war's been going on for 16 months, and Israel's obviously getting their ass kicked in Gaza by Hamas and the other groups. So I don't know what Trump thinks he's going to change.
Well, maybe he's going to send military troops in there. That's something that they've done a few times in the past. What's going on with Mexico and Canada now?
Well, I guess I don't know the details, but I guess there was some sort of negotiation for both sides to drop tariffs, and Mexico agreed to put troops on the border to help with interdicting the supply of the flow of drugs and illegal immigration. So I guess that was enough to get Trump to agree not to sanction Mexico or anything. So that's the extent of what I know.
Okay, so he's only put a delay on that. And do you know that the information, particularly in Canada, the information that he says, Canada, because Trump claims a win here, Canada have now agreed that they're going to send troops. Okay, I've still got you, so I'll continue.
All right, now we're back.
Canada has said they're going to send troops to the border to protect it and blah, blah, blah. There's a huge movement at the moment to try and prove a connection between Vancouver criminal gangs, which are ethnically Chinese, as a great deal of Vancouver is. So obviously there is some crime in Vancouver, and some of that crime relates to China, and connecting that to the dreaded CCP. And I'm seeing all kinds of propaganda. It looks to me like a very, very clever CIA PSYOP. It's a psychological operation that says, we're going to prove the links. Well, they're not. They're alleging the links, and allegations in Western media seem to be taken as proof. It's not. So when they make allegations that there is a massive link to the CCP, massive amounts of Chinese money, and they're causing crime, and they're causing inflation, they're causing house prices, all this sort of stuff. It's a very anti-China program going on right now in Canada in order to try and convince Canadian people. So the Canadian government back in December said, we're going to police this better, and they released a paper and they said what they were going to do. And that is now being claimed by Trump as being, I won this victory because now Canada is going to give us what I wanted. So he's claiming the victory now. He's going to do that a lot, I think. Mexico, I'm not so sure of the situation. But in Canada, the information was available back in December, and he's claiming yesterday or the day before that, it's about 3 or 4 days ago, in fact, he's claiming that now Canada has come to the party to do what he made them do, which they did during the Biden administration. So he's claiming a win there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how far Mexico is going to be willing to go along with him, because as you know, they have a.
Well, whatever happens, you have a deal with Mexico and Canada called the USMCA, and if you're putting tariffs onto those two countries, USMCA is Mexico and Canada. If you're putting tariffs and restrictions onto those two countries, whatever happened to that trade deal, which Trump himself signed in his last presidency?
You're talking about NAFTA?
Yeah, no, the NAFTA
I assume that's still in effect.
No, NAFTA got scrapped because USMCA replaced it. And Trump, it was, who scrapped NAFTA. And then having scrapped NAFTA, he created this USMCA, which gave America more power. And now he's just overridden that. And basically, he was on media the other day saying, I don't know who signs these things, whoever signed these terrible deals, but he did. He scrapped NAFTA and created USMCA, and Mexico and Canada signed to agree to this. And now he's overridden his own deal.
Yeah, it's no telling what he's going to do from one day to the next. It's going to be a wild 4 years.
It sure is.
I mean, at least we have a president who can talk now. That's.
Do you?
Something. Low expectations, I guess.
I don't know if there was a movie made a few years ago called Idiocracy. Do you know about that movie?
I haven't seen it. I've heard about it, but yeah, it's
you
like
ought to. You ought to.
Yeah,
you're living in it right now. Trevor says
Yeah.
Trump will never honor any agreement, and so far he's proven that is true. I mean, Trevor's suggesting this, but the evidence all points to the fact he's never honored an agreement. In fact, I don't think the U.S. has. Do you? Do you know of any agreements that the U.S. has ever honored?
Well, I mean, yeah, either the U.S. pulls out of them or they violate them. So, the Minsk agreements with Russia, I mean, all the countries that France and
Okay,
Germany and so forth,
since
and
Trump
Ukraine
came to
didn't pay
power,
attention to that.
since Trump came to power, he's
Um,
just in the last 10 days, 10 or 12 days, whatever it is. Since he came to power, he's pulled out
mhm.
of the World Health Organization. He's he He hasn't pulled out of the World Trade Organization, but they're not doing anything to make the World Trade Organization work, which he can do. And
Yeah.
it's America that's stopping the World Trade Organization from working. He's just pulled out of the United Nations Human Rights Commission again. Nikki Haley did that when she was his Human Rights Commissioner, his United Nations Commissioner back in 2018. And he's literally today just pulled out of that again. So he's no longer a part of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. He's pulled out of the Paris Agreement. What else has he pulled out of? It's quite a lot.
He pulled out, was it the INF Treaty or the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty? I forget which came first.
Right.
I think it was the
Okay.
Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that he pulled out of in his first term. And of course, he also pulled out of the deal that Obama had agreed to with Iran. So, yeah.
Well, talking of Iran, he's just sanctioned them again.
There's one remaining arms control agreement that. Wait, what?
Go on. He's just sanctioned Iran again. Just today, signed some more orders to further sanction Iran, and because I've been living in China now for 20 years. Before I came to China, I remember reading that Iran was on the cusp of getting nuclear weapons. And today, because they're on the cusp of getting nuclear weapons, he sanctioned them again. So this has been going on for at least...
Well, they may as well go ahead and get nuclear weapons now. I mean, that's not going to work.
Now, Brian Beletic, who I admire greatly from New World Atlas, he's made the comment this morning. This is exactly the reason why Iran needs a nuclear deterrent. It needs to have one. So, if Iran gets onto nuclear weapons, I think it probably would be a deterrent against Israel doing something. But he's threatened to obliterate Iran. So, in other words, if Iran were to, he says, this is him talking, if Iran were to assassinate him or someone close to him, then he will obliterate the entire country. So much for this, the Iranians need rescuing from this government. He wants to obliterate the entire country and murder every single Iranian that exists because they killed somebody in retaliation for killing that Soleimani, the general that he killed many years ago.
Gosh, lost my train of thought. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Well, I was going to ask you about what's going on in Latin America, because there's Trump issues in Colombia, Panama, and El Salvador right now.
Well, he wants to take over the Panama Canal, and with El Salvador, he wants to send illegal immigrants and prisoners to El Salvador, keep in prison there. I don't know what's going on with Colombia. Haven't really kept up with that.
Oh, he cut Colombia out of the SWIFT system for a day. He basically did what he's done to Russia and sanctioned the entire country, cutting them out. And this is really difficult for some friends of mine here. I've got Colombian friends here. They can't access their bank account. Oh, they can now because Colombia came to the party. Again, Colombia had to do what he said he wanted them to do, which was to accept a plane load or 2 plane loads of shackled illegal immigrants. So they were seen on a military plane in shackles, and the Colombian government said, "No, we're not going to accept them like this. These are not criminals. These are illegal immigrants. They're not criminals. So if you're sending them back, you put them on planes, and we'll accept them. If you're sending them back as prisoners, we can't accept that." And so
Yeah.
he just closed down Colombia's economy.
Yeah. I mean, regardless of who's in charge, the U.S. is like the big giant bully on the beach, kicking sand in everybody's face. And even though the U.S. is getting weaker and weaker by the day, it's not going to stop that as long as it has some power, I guess. But
do you see that what Warwick Powell describes as a U.S. autoimmune deficiency? Every single action that they take to try and strengthen themselves actually weakens them further. Are you seeing that
yeah,
as well?
well, I mean, obviously, all they did in Ukraine was destroy Ukraine and get 1 million Ukrainians killed. They didn't weaken Russia any. They strengthened Russia. Russia's military is stronger now than it was, and their economy's still growing and getting stronger. And like maybe I don't know, maybe Biden's administration intended to weaken Germany, which they pulled that off by cutting off blowing off Nord Stream and so forth. But it certainly hasn't helped the U.S. any. And of course, they're not winning in the Middle East. Well, I mean, they did in Syria, so I guess that's something for them. Yay, the terrorists took over in Syria. But yeah, I mean, they like if they went to war with Iran, I mean, we'd be back in Great Depression type circumstances. Nobody would be able to get oil without paying an arm and a leg. So,
well, isn't America self-sufficient in oil?
Yeah, but the prices would go way, way, way up. We'd be paying like, $10 a gallon or something instead of like $3 now here, $3 US dollars per gallon.
Yeah, I don't know what it costs here. I have no idea.
Obviously,
most people now use electric cars, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, over there, yeah. I've been seeing since I got onto Xiaohongshu, and I've been watching videos about people, what's going on with that on YouTube. I've getting a lot of videos about people test driving Chinese electric cars, and they're just amazing. There's one that's like the it was kind of funny. The AI basically refused to answer when the guy who was test driving it asked them, "Is your body a copy of the Porsche Taycan?" And just didn't respond. So the answer is
yes. That's probably the Xiaomi SU7. It does look very Porsche-esque.
Yes.
It's a nice car. Yeah. Very nice car.
Oh yeah. It looks like it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I see a lot of them around here. We live in quite a wealthy area. I mean, I'm not wealthy by any stretch, and there's a lot of wealthy people living in the Greater Bay Area where I am. The city where I live in is the least wealthy city in all of the Greater Bay Area, so it's the most affordable. And I like living here because it is affordable. But we see a lot of these SU7s, and nearly all of them have got beautiful ladies driving them now. There's not many guys. It seems to have been one of those cars that's kind of become the ladies' car. And
that's interesting because over here nice. Sports cars are a guy thing.
Well, these are they don't have the throaty roar of a standard sports car. They're very quiet. They're sleek. They're lovely looking cars. And then the door opens and a beautiful lady gets out. It's a common thing to see here. It just seems to be the thing. Yeah, the cars here are incredibly good right now.
Yeah.
I get into these with Didi. We don't have Uber here. We have Didi, and you get into a
Mhm.
Didi car every day. It's a different car. You know, it's like, what am I in now? And even what you would consider to be the boring cars, the Eons and things like that, those cars are really, really nice. And
Mhm.
getting into them and just thinking, wow, this is really comfortable. But there's others, many others. I think the car industry needs to kind of consolidate itself a little bit. Let's move on. You were going to talk about the Syrian conflict or Syrian issues there. You know more about that than I will probably ever know, so I'll let you go with that one. Let's talk about the Syrian thing.
Uh, sure. Well, as our viewers probably know, the U.S. has been trying to overthrow various governments around the Middle East and North Africa that were supportive of the Palestinians ever since Bush was president. They back in, I think it was in right after 9/11, basically they formulated a plan to overthrow 7 governments in that region within 5 years, and they missed the time frame, but the U.S. has now overthrown or severely undermined 6 out of those 7 governments. With Iran being the only holdout, and so Syria has been um, one of the few countries in that part of the world that has had an independent government for decades, 60s. And then in 1970, Bashar al-Assad's father took over as president, and then Assad, the son, took over in, I believe, 2000, and was just recently deposed. But anyway, so turns out that even though certainly there were genuine dissatisfactions driving a lot of the Arab Spring protests, also a lot of it was sort of pre-planned and pre-organized by the United States with the objective of pursuing this aim of overthrowing some of those governments that the U.S. had slated for regime change. And one of them was Libya, and their government fell pretty quickly within like 8 months or something like that in 2011. NATO bombing campaign, and U.S. and its various European and Gulf state allies, as well as Israel, funded terrorists, Al Qaeda, and so forth, to overthrow that government, and then they turned their attention to Syria. And there's a lot of idiot leftists here in the United States who think that there was like a genuine democratic revolutionary movement to overthrow Assad in Syria, and are just blind to the fact that all along the U.S. And its allies, Turkey and the Gulf states and Western Europe, have been organizing this campaign to overthrow the Syrian government. And at the very first protests, as part of the Arab Spring, some of these quote unquote rebels that all these countries had backed did exactly what they did in Ukraine in 2014. They shot into the crowd, shot at the police, and killed several people. And of course, Western propaganda blamed that on the Syrian government. And that happened several times. And each time is blamed on the Syrian government. And you see, as you probably know, eventually a full-blown civil war broke out. And you hear these claims that 94% of the 500,000 or so people killed in that war were killed by the brutal dictator Assad, but in fact, most of them were killed by the quote-unquote rebels, or by U.S. bombing or Israeli bombing or Turkey, etc. And there was all this atrocity propaganda. There were 3 separate occasions where chemical weapons attacks were staged by the quote unquote rebels who were proven to have chemical weapons. Syria actually arranged with the OPCW, Chemical Weapons Monitoring Organization affiliated with the UN, to get rid of their chemical weapons, which they did. But they kept getting blamed for all these chemical weapons attacks. Of course, Syria was just devastated between the civil war and sanctions, which have been going on against Syria for decades and were jacked up to unprecedented levels for any country, I think, in 2019, the so-called Caesar sanctions. Plus, U.S. troops have been occupying northeastern Syria, or a portion of northeastern Syria, for like 10 years, which is exactly where most of their oil so, basically, in the long run, Syria's government didn't really have a chance, and Assad fell in December, and the terrorists have taken over, and have been extremely brutal, as they have been all along. So
there was 2 aspects to this that appear to have been the 2 major things that prevented Assad from keeping control, and one of those is the digital space, if you like. He lost control of his media, his social media, the digital space. There was basically no censorship on that, and it was just bombarded with Western tropes of just basically lies, misinformation. And this is one thing where, being in China, I really appreciate the fact that misinformation in China is immediately banned. Excuse me. Now, what can happen here, unfortunately, is that good information can equally get banned. I mean, I could, for example, I could write a complete article, make a video about Tiananmen Square, put it onto YouTube with all of the truth. But if I put it onto social media, it would immediately get banned because they won't accept anything about Tiananmen Square being on there.
You can't even search for Tiananmen Square or even Beijing 1989 on Chinese social media.
Exactly. And the reason is because there is just so much misinformation about it that they don't bother trying to check or verify. They just say you can't say it, and I kind of appreciate that, although it's frustrating and disappointing. Hang on one second. Trevor, thank you very much, and I agree. Everybody, please hit the like button.
Yes, and please hit the like button on my channel, The Bitter Pill, as well.
I don't know why.
Go over there and watch a few seconds from there, please, as well, so I can get more views.
Yeah, get more views. What I was going to say there, it was China has maintained since 1989 control over its media, control over its airspace. After the invention and the introduction of the internet and then digital social media, China has maintained control, and that way it has maintained its stability and its harmony. That was lost in Syria. Now, what also happened was NGOs, and we've just had, I think it's extremely rare for me to say to Trump, if I saw you today, I'd give you a high five for this, but he has just scrapped US aid, at least for 90 days. And I think this is the other thing, the NGOs getting into Syria, into the country, and any country where you have US NGOs. It's okay if your country is on the side of the United States. The US NGOs will come in there and they will, just make sure that they bed you down nicely and continue to control you. But if your side is adversarial to the United States, NGOs, as Hong Kong found out to its expense, are very, very dangerous. This is a good point.
Yeah. Well,
Tiananmen myth is as real as Santa Claus. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I think I've told you before, I've been having constant arguments with people in this socialist group that I'm part of, this discussion group, where the somebody brought up Tiananmen Square. Well, what about Tiananmen? I was trying to tell them about what China's like now, and they're like, well, what about Tiananmen Square? And I basically provided irrefutable evidence that there was no massacre of anybody in Tiananmen Square. In fact, they let the guy climb up onto the tank and all that, and left him alone. Immediately it was like, well, they massacred people outside of Tiananmen Square. Well, they must, okay, so it wasn't a Tiananmen Square massacre, but they must have massacred civilians somewhere else because China bad,
Yeah. I've asked them if you can please provide me the names of the people massacred. Now, okay, they'll argue I can't get those names, but surely, if the CIA believe that there were 10,000 people, and that was the first claim, that was by the British government, actually, the British High Commissioner, the British ambassador sent and WikiLeaks has refuted all of this as well. So if you believe that Julian Assange has genuine information about what the American government is doing, and I think most people on the left either will or they should, then surely you believe that WikiLeaks has got the right information, or at least part of the right information. So if WikiLeaks exposed this Tiananmen Square myth as a lie, then why is it still out there in your leftist society, where the people really ought to be thinking, hang on a second, my government and my media have lied to me about this. Why are they telling me the truth? And why then does Tiananmen Square come back every single year in June with a commemoration in every media that the government, U.S. government, controls? Why is that happening? It's simply because they keep renewing a 40-year-old incident. Why have they got nothing new to come up with? So, I mean, there's a lot of discussions about this. If you really want to believe this, then you're always going to believe it. It's as simple as that. You want to believe it. You want to believe China is authoritarian, dictatorial. China will turn tanks on its own people. You want to believe that, then that's fine. Believe it. But what's really the truth is whoever believes that, has been completely hoodwinked. And some people are happy about that because they don't like China. I don't like China. I don't like the Chinese. Or they say, I love the Chinese, but I hate their government. And then you tell them that every single person in China is related to, works with, or friends with a member of the Communist Party. They go, no, that's not possible. Well, it is. There's 100 million of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you probably know quite a few people in the CPC.
I do. My wife's mother and father are members, and I didn't know that until I'd been married to her for several years. They had a new plaque put on the door, and I said, "What's this plaque for?" There's two plaques actually, and one of them is because my father-in-law served in the military, and it's got this plaque that says, "An honored person lives here, a person that the country respects, who served his time, did what he served his country." Defended the country, and he was involved. He didn't actually go into Vietnam, but he was involved around that era in the military then. As particularly the 1979, he was preparing to go there for when they did the 3-week incursion into Vietnam, but he never actually made it there. But he was on standby for that. And he served his country, and he's got a plaque on the door saying that this guy served his country. And then there's another plaque that says Communist Party members live here. Now, they got that plaque because my mother and father-in-law have both served the party for more than 50 years. Both of them are more than 60-year members, actually. So they've been in it since they were very young. They're in their 80s now.
Other argument I've had with a member of this group that I was talking about, I told, like we were talking about how, it's written into the Chinese constitution that the Communist Party is the dominant party in China, but by constitutionally, even though other parties are allowed, and you don't even have to be in a party to run for local office and so forth. And so we were discussing, well, is this inherently undemocratic for that to be the case, for it to be basically not a one-party state, but a one-party dominating state. And I said, well, it's just like any other organization. It depends on how the organization functions as to whether it's democratic or not. It's not whether or not that party is the constitutionally the dominant party. I mean, look at the U.S. We have two parties. Neither of them are written into the Constitution as dominant parties, but they're both, completely undemocratic. It would take a long time to explain this, but basically, the Communist Party of China seems to be much more democratic than anything in the U.S. And I said, well, okay, I said, it depends on how the party functions. And also, you're talking about the party that led the Chinese Revolution, and it's a workers' party and so on. And he's like, a workers' party? No, it's a petty bourgeois party. And I'm like, well, there's almost 100 million people in it. So how are they all petty bourgeois? And granted, the qualifications to get into CP are pretty lofty, and likely most of the people in it are highly educated and so forth. But you don't have to be in the party.
Not so. Anyone can join the party, but they need to be upstanding members of the community. They need to work within the community. You don't have to have my father-in-law had 4 years of school. That's it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, we're going back to an era when that was quite a common thing. But he's one of the most, I would say, he's the most intelligent person I know. A very, very smart guy, but he's not educated at all. But he's educated himself. He's educated in the ways of the world. He's an expert on Scottish whiskey. He understands wines. He's a very easygoing gentleman, really nice guy, but he had no education whatsoever. He joined the army when he worked on the farm, and then joined the army when he could, and so his education is from a different world to schools. So it's not about education. Now, if you want to be in governance, yes, you must be highly educated, and that's not just educated in your own field, but educated in governance. You cannot become a high-level bureaucrat in China's government until you have been through governance school. They have schools. There's one in Zhongshan here where people go to learn how to be administrators. And once they've learned that skill and put that skill to experience and proven, then they are both elected and selected. They're selected and elected. And it's a hugely democratic process. Really is a hugely democratic process. And Xi Jinping was put into place by the National People's Congress, which consists of 2,799 people, all of whom are elected by their peers. Every single one of them elected. And they're the people that put the president into place.
Yeah. And, as you know, here in the States, the president can pick anybody he wants to be his cabinet members, his assistants in various spheres. And, Kennedy picked his brother for attorney general. And that's perfectly legal here. But,
was his brother qualified
neither hire nor... What's that?
Was his brother qualified to be attorney general? I know he was a qualified lawyer.
Yeah, but my point is that wouldn't be allowed in China. He couldn't have picked his brother or anyone else if he were the president of China. Xi Jinping can neither appoint nor fire any of the other higher-ups in the Chinese government.
Technically, you're right, and technically you're wrong as well. He can select, but then the election process needs to take place. So he can select. If his brother was qualified to be the vice president or the premier or something like that, he could select his brother and say, I want to nominate my brother for this. But his brother would have had to have come through the system and be qualified. And then the National People's Congress would have to vote to say, yes, we agree with your selection. So there would be more than, generally speaking, there'd be more than one person up for the position, and the NPC would vote on who gets that position. But I would suggest right now that if Xi Jinping suggested someone, he'd get 99% of the votes anyway. He can't do a thing wrong as far as the Chinese people are concerned. The only criticism I've ever heard of him, literally the only criticism I've heard, is that he's too soft, particularly on America.
Yeah.
It's not what you'd expect, is it?
Well, I mean, not what most people would expect, but I mean, when you consider that the U.S. tries to undermine every government that is in any way not under the thumb of the U.S., I mean, you kind of have to be, not soft. So.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we going next? So I wanted to basically, for me, it was talking about.
I lost most of what you just said, Jerry. Could you start over?
Okay, I was going to ask where we were going next, because I was going to talk about what Trump has been doing recently, and you're not all across that. So you were going to talk about Syria. What else were you going to talk about today?
Well, I've been just reading up a lot on China, and we're in this group that I was talking about. We're having a discussion on modern China in a couple of weeks, so I'm really looking forward to that. And I don't know, there's nothing newsworthy about it, but I mean, it's just part of this general trend of hopefully Americans learning more about China, which is just very exciting.
Well, let me ask a question then. Why do you have an association or an organization or a group of people there who are concerned about China? Because here in China, I can't think of any single person I've ever met who wanted to get involved in any kind of a group to discuss what America is doing. Why do Americans want to do this?
Well, I mean, because there's so much controversy in of course, the general public has been brainwashed their whole lives about China, and unfortunately, so has much of the left. So this has been, and it's the case for China and every other country that the U.S. has government has had in its crosshairs for undermining and overthrowing, whether it be the Soviet Union back in the day, or China, or Russia these days, or Syria, or wherever it is. There's just so much. The misinformation is just so pervasive that you would, people that you would think would know better, revolutionary socialists who, you would think would be supportive of the Chinese Revolution or the Russian Revolution or whatever. They're very misinformed, and so there are constant arguments on the left in the United States and Europe about these various places. So yeah, it's a big topic of discussion, and
but I think you're missing
organizational splits over these sorts of issues.
I think you're missing my point. My point is, what business is it of people in America what Chinese people do?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. And it's like, so what if these things that bad things that you believe about country X were true? What are you going to do about it? And what's really weird is that they believe all these negative things about China or Syria or whatever it is, and they say, well, I'm anti-war. I don't think that the U.S. should be trying to overthrow this or that government. And I'm like, well, you believe all the same stuff that the people who are trying to overthrow that government believe. So what's your basis for being opposed to it? It's just really weird.
Yeah. Having, sorry, a bad one today. Having lived in China now for a long time, I've started to become, I'm not Chinese in any respect, but I'm starting to think a little bit or understand how Chinese people think. And Chinese people, I mean, I get this from my wife. she'd say, well, there's an organization in the Senate. There's an anti-China CCP commission in the Senate, and they have a group of people who care about what China is doing. And my wife says to me, well, what business is it of theirs? Surely, if I'm unhappy with my government, I'll do something about that. Why is it America's business to go out and make these changes? How does China's growth affect you in the street in America, when really all of the problems that you have in America are created by your own government and your own people? Why not leave China alone? China did not steal your jobs. China did not take the profit away. China did not take your houses. China doesn't own your banks, but your banks want to own China's banks. China doesn't own your debt. China has nothing to do with you, yet, not you personally, you Americans, but Americans are completely brainwashed, I believe is the right word, into believing that everything that's going wrong is China's fault. Why?
Well, because they're brainwashed. Simple as that. I mean, it's easy to understand why the U.S. government and the U.S. ruling class wants to mess with China or every other country, because they want to make as much money as possible, and that requires dominating as much of the world as possible. But yeah, in the case of certainly the left or socialists or communists in the United States, you would think that they would not be obsessed with trying to nitpick every bad thing that either is true or is just made up in the vast majority of cases about China or everywhere else. You would think they would realize that that's pointless, but they don't, because it's just their minds have been warped by this propaganda, and they don't realize it because they think of themselves as being the enlightened ones who see through the bullshit, and they're not.
They're not. No, they're being. I thought Hong Long put the word up there, deflection. It seems to me that there are two things that the American government likes to do very well. One is to deflect, and the other one is to divide. They're very good at dividing, and by dividing, they can control. When they divide, you can't get cohesion when you have division, and when you don't have cohesion, you can't possibly have organization. If you can't have organization and cohesion, then you can't have any opposition that is of any use, and that's what I think is happening. So, I mean, that's my view on it.
So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a deliberate effort by the U.S. government to divide the American left. I mean, literally, Jacobin magazine and a now defunct socialist organization called the International Socialist Organization, and various leftist organizations and publications and so forth literally get some of their funding from the NED. So, I mean, like they have undermined leftist organizations and publications and so forth in the United States for decades, because they know if people realize the truth about all these countries that our government and media are denigrating, there'd be a much more powerful anti-war movement, among many other things. So
I got this interesting. I think this is sarcasm. I hope this is sarcasm. If it's not, it's a bit rude, but I think it's sarcasm. China looks very poor. Look at the background. My background is a village on Hainan Island, and it's no longer an occupied village. It's a tourist attraction because up until about 40 years ago, it was still occupied. The guy who showed us around the village was a resident of one of the houses down the street on that side of the road, and he actually lived down there when he was a child. He's a 45, 50-year-old adult now, and he lived down there. This whole village is made out of rocks which were hewn from a volcano which was extinct a million years ago or more, and I've got this picture because I happen to love the village, but it's also a great example of how China is retaining its old culture. It's taken this village and it's now a tourist attraction. This is how people used to live. It's not showing how poor they are. It's showing how rich they are in their culture. And I think that's probably something that needs to be understood. Chinese culture is extremely rich. Chinese history is 5,000 years old. This village is older than the United States of America. It's not older than the land that makes up the United States of America, but it's older than the country, the nation that is the United States of America. China is not a nation, it's a civilization. It goes back 5,000 or 3,000 or 4,000, depending on your view of what starts a civilization. And this was part of it, an organized community that was older than the United States. I think you can trust us, guys.
Related to that, Li Jinping had an interesting post today on X about a New Year's celebration in Tibet with traditional Tibetan dancing and so forth that was nationally televised. There's all this talk about, they're committing cultural genocide against Tibet and Xinjiang, and it's just complete bullshit. It's the exact opposite. They've done more than any other country in the world, I think, to protect and promote minority cultures.
It looks like this guy was not being sarcastic. Sorry, can't trust you guys. Which country is better, China and India? I never lived in India, so I can only say China is better for me. And certainly for the 800 million people who got lifted out of poverty, China is better than India, where they still have a billion in poverty. So it's a debating point, isn't it? Bye, guys, or bye, MMM Lee. So probably better off without him, if that's the case. This is an interesting one. China's 85% capitalism. What do you reckon? You're an outsider looking in. I'm going to have a comment on this, but you're the outsider looking in. What do you think?
Well, I mean, all the natural resources, the valuable natural resources in China are controlled by the government. The land is owned by the government. The banks are largely owned by the government. And various other aspects of the commanding heights of the economy, financial and industrial and so forth, like all of the top companies in the global Fortune 500 that are Chinese are at least partially government owned. So I'm not sure where this person is getting this. Yes, there is capitalism in China because in the late 70s, the CPC realized that hey, we're falling behind the rest of the world. Even though we've made enormous progress in China, we cannot develop this country to a modern level unless we can become integrated into the global economy. And so, market elements were introduced to a much greater extent than they had been before. But, having a partially market economy is not the same thing necessarily as having capitalism. It depends on what the government is doing, and it depends on like in whose interests the government is ruling. And when you consider things like 800 million people lifted out of poverty, and all so much of the air pollution in the major cities being cleaned up, and the enormous efforts the government made to protect people in China from COVID, which cost billions and billions of dollars. And like I could go all day with examples of ways in which the Chinese government has acted in the interests of the working class, not the capitalists. The
real figure, the actual figure, is that the Chinese economy is made up of 51% of free market and 49% state-owned enterprises, effectively. So that's the official line. But I would say that capitalism is very much allowed and approved of, but Donat has really hit the nail on the head here. Guided capitalism, it's controlled capitalism, and it's not unfettered or wild free capitalism. You cannot get to be a bazillionaire like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. You will never get to that status, because in order to get to that status, you have to impoverish other people. If you are going to be wealthy, that's fine, but you're going to bring other people up with you in China. That's the situation. There's no problem having $1 billion in your bank account, but if you're not putting something back into the community that gave you that $1 billion, then you're going to lose it. And there's been a few. I mean, they talk about the Jack Ma case, and that's not really a good example. Jack Ma was trying to do something entirely different. He wanted to create a new banking system of microfinance that didn't apply to the banking rules and would have effectively given unfettered capitalism to his corporation. That was stopped. Now, had he got something that was within the market rules and still became even richer than he currently is, then they wouldn't have stopped him. They only stopped him because he was breaching the limits, the limitations of what the free market in China is. Not a free market at all. It's a controlled market. And that's really guided capitalism is a great way of describing it.
I mean, the portion of the economy that is capitalist, yes. I was, I don't know how many of your viewers are from, unless they're from America. You may not be familiar with this term that describes the Midwestern part of the United States, which is where I am. It's often called the Rust Belt because so many factories closed down here, and the companies built new factories in Mexico or China back in the early days of the opening up when labor was very cheap there, and wherever else. In the town that I live in, Bloomington, Indiana, we had maybe the largest TV factory in the United States for a long time. It produced the first color televisions in the United States. We had a big General Electric plant and so forth and so on. That's all gone now. Those companies are long gone to other countries. And that could not happen in China. Like, a company could not close down a factory in China and move to like Bangladesh or something. That would not be allowed. So
no, it would be allowed if companies are doing it here. They're taking away low technology and replacing it with high technology. I've got a friend who ran a shoe factory here in Zhongshan. It had 20,000 employees. They closed that down, and the factory has moved to Cambodia now. I want to cover this. I want to cover this point here.
I misconstrued what I just heard this today. I think the rule is you can't take all your technology with you when you leave. You have to make it available to the government as a condition for building your factory or whatever there in the first place.
There's a thing called shared technology or technology transfer. For example, let's use Mercedes-Benz as an example. Mercedes-Benz, German car, very high-end, high-tech, very expensive luxury item. And when they wanted to build cars inside of China, China said, you can build cars inside of China. This is just one example. You can build cars inside of China, but what you need to do is you need to give us the technology of the cars that you're building. You share that technology. You want our market, we want your products. So the agreement was made. Mercedes-Benz would sign the deal, share the technology. But what they didn't do was bring their cutting edge technology to China. They bought 2 years ago's technology. So if you want to buy a Mercedes-Benz that's built, made, and manufactured in China, then you're buying a 2-year-old version of the German version, which is made in Germany under their their latest innovations. So they still. I have a friend here, very very wealthy friend, who waited 6 months for a car, and I said, well, why don't you just get it locally? I know cars are available locally. He said, no, I'm getting the German one imported because it's this year's model. I'm getting the
Mhm.
latest model, and the ones they're building here are 2 years old. This is what was happening. So they weren't actually transferring their high-end technology. What they were transferring was old stuff. And China did agree that China copied that. China improved on that. China's innovated on that. There's no question about it. China learned from that. But it was a deal
Mhm.
that was done that every single company, corporation that came into China knew exactly what they were letting themselves in for, and they had a choice. You don't need to. I made a video a while ago about why China doesn't have the secret recipe for Colonel Sanders chicken. First of all, they don't want it because they have better chicken here anyway. But secondly, Colonel Sanders, KFC or Yum Foods, said, "Well, this is proprietary, and we're not sharing this with you, but we want your market." And the government said, "Yeah, okay, you can have that. You can come in and do that. There's no issues about it. It's technology transfer. It's not
Mhm.
everything that you run in your business is going to get copied in China, because for my wife makes a better fried chicken than KFC, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you don't eat chicken. I know you're a vegan, but I'm sure that there are better chickens than KFC around. If you
Mhm.
go to any small organization that still survives, if such a thing does. So yeah, it's a technology transfer, shared transfer. But then when they leave the country, they're only leaving behind what they left. If they do leave the country, Mercedes is still here, VW is still here. All these companies that came here for the market and shared technology, they're all still here. And if they leave, they're not leaving behind something that they value. They're leaving behind the technology that they were making in the past, and they're moving away if they are moving away. China is advancing and innovating on things that don't exist yet. They're not copying these things. They're innovating,
Mhm.
changing, and improving things. And so Huawei phones, Huawei telecommunication. They didn't copy Apple. What they did, they said, "This is a good idea. Let's see how we can make it better." And they do.
Mhm.
Huawei phones are better than Apple. They really are better
Yeah.
than Apple. I've used
Yeah.
both, and I can assure you, I'd much rather have a Huawei phone, and it's a
Uh,
third of the price less than an Apple. The most expensive Huawei phone is cheaper than the most expensive Apple. They're not
yeah.
cheap, but they're still
Yeah.
cheaper. And what
Yeah.
does
Yeah. I
Apple
mean, I've
do?
got an iPhone and it's okay, but I have problems with it. It's far from perfect. So
Well,
I
it's
think I
also
might
the
look
most
around for a
expensive.
Huawei next time.
It's also the most expensive, and Apple happens to be the most profitable corporation in the world. How can you be the
Yeah.
most profitable corporation and be giving your clients, your consumers, value for money? You can't. You're ripping them off.
Yeah.
I wanted to cover this. Will the tariffs affect China in any way? Tariffs, yes. Tariffs have
Mhm.
affected China and are affecting China in quite a big day,
Mhm.
in quite a big way. Um, what's happened in China in December, there was a massive trade surplus for China. Thousands and thousands of corporations in America said, we have got to make our orders before the inauguration. And China had a boom month. It finished its year with the highest month probably in history. Certainly, it finished its year 5.4% growth on the GDP, which was much, much better than the anticipated around 5%. But even up until December, people were still saying it might be 5.2%, but it came in at 5.4%
Mhm.
because tariffs affected it last year in a very positive way. Everyone getting their orders in before the tariffs hit. So the delivery came before inauguration. And on
Mhm.
inauguration, everybody knew that Trump would sign an order which said tariffs will go up, and he didn't. So everybody would knew wrongly. But he has put tariffs on all Chinese things. So that's now 25%, 25%, I think, on everything coming from China. And
Well.
then there's a percentage of tariffs going through, if it's a Chinese product, going through Canada or Mexico. So he's done that, and that did affect. So it affected in a positive
Mhm.
way in December. This year, orders will be very low from the United States. And the calculations are that I've seen, and I've seen some I'm involved with some groups here that are very, very expert, much more expert than I am. The calculations are that the effect to the GDP in China this year will be about 0.2%. It will bring China's GDP down about 0.2%. This year, there will be a reduction in
0.2% less. You mean 0.2% less growth than would have happened?
Yes.
Okay.
So China will still achieve a 5% growth, but that 5% growth will be a little bit lower than last year's growth. Their growth is still double what the United States is making. It's 20 times what Australia is making, and it's something like 100 times what the UK is making in growth. So growth will slow. That doesn't mean China will go backwards, but the media will report it as China is collapsing again. So yes, the tariffs do affect China.
Yeah. Well, back on whoever that commenter was that said China was 85% capitalist. Tell me, Jerry, you've lived in China for 20 years. Has China ever had a recession since you've been there?
Nope.
No. They grow every year.
Yes. Yeah. And every year they beat the forecast.
Crash. My wife and her partner at the time lost their house, as did millions of other Americans during that. Lots and lots of people were homeless. And rich people made out like bandits because that's how the government is geared, is to reward wealthy people and screw over everybody else. But there was no Great Recession in China.
There's no recession. There was a property market crash, and the property market crash was quite deliberate. I refer to this as a controlled demolition. It was not a crash. It was a controlled demolition. What the Chinese government did in 2019 was said, in 2021, we're going to change the rules for property development. You need to adjust your business practices because we cannot have overseas speculation in the Chinese housing market. Houses are for living in, not for speculating on. And almost all of the industry said, yeah, that's fair enough. And they adapted. And most of the industry at the time, 2019, was not adapting. It was going the wrong way. House prices were escalating. And so the government said, we need to control this because houses are for people. They're not for profit. They're for people to live in. And they literally crashed the market, deliberately crashed the market. There were two companies, Country Town and Country, or Country Town, and Evergrande. Town and Country, I think it was, and Evergrande. So these two companies both had different structures. One of them was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It lost 90% of its income, lost 90% of its value pretty much overnight. And then the other one had overseas debt bonds, and it was issuing debt bonds that it was selling to overseas speculators. So overseas people were making money on Chinese properties, and Chinese people trying to get onto the market couldn't afford it. I own apartments. I actually own 3 apartments, not because I'm rich or anything like that, but because when we married, my wife and I saved up and we bought an apartment for cash. Then my mother passed away, and I bought another one with that cash that she left me. So we had 2 apartments. And then a few months ago, just over a year ago, we moved into a 3rd apartment because I have some problems with my leg and we wanted to be on the ground floor. So we're now on a ground floor apartment, and we're trying to sell the other 2 because we're not rich. So we're trying to sell the others, but the price has collapsed.
There was an interesting comment a couple of comments ago. Somebody was talking about their Chinese smartphone and how happy they were with it and how cheap it was. Speaking the truth, give peace a chance. I had that comment. If you could put that up. Yeah. So.
Yep. I agree. Xiaomi is a great phone. It's very cheap. Honor, which used to be part of Huawei, it's very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Huawei is a good phone and it's expensive. There are 100 brands. Oppo, Vivo. Mine's a Vivo.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely no problem with it at all. It's great.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper than buying a Huawei. But I had a Huawei before, and I
Mm-hmm.
liked it. I it's I say it got stolen. That's not true. It wasn't stolen. It was lost. I actually dropped it in a toilet, and I went back to get it. I went back to. I realized where it had fallen out of my pocket. You know, in a public toilet, it had fallen out of my pocket. I realized this, and then I went out of the toilet, and then 10 minutes later, oh, where's my phone? Went back to the toilet. It's gone. I tried to find it. So it wasn't stolen, it was lost, but somebody did take possession of a new phone that they couldn't get into because they're so secure. You need my thumbprint to get in there. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure why this was any benefit to anyone, but I lost that phone and I bought another one fairly quickly that I could afford. So I got a cheaper one. The Huawei went missing, and I got the Vivo, which was about a third of the price of the Huawei. So
I see.
that was why, yeah, they're good value for money. They work perfectly well, and they do everything that an iPhone will do.
Mm-hmm. Well,
right, where were we going next?
Oh,
yeah. Someone says Oppo is not cheap. I agree, it's not cheap, but it's cheaper. Just a second. And someone else said Redmi, OnePlus and Redmi are both owned by Xiaomi. I didn't know that. I thought Redmi was, but I didn't know OnePlus. These are just other phones. Xiaomi started as a very, very cheap phone maker, very cheap, but it's turned into a really good quality product at a cheap price. They have Xiaomi stores. Xiaomi stores are worth
cheap, high quality cars too.
Yeah, not really many yet. There's not enough of them on the market to satisfy the need.
Yeah.
Oh, someone says OnePlus is Oppo. I don't know. We're not going to have an argument about who owns what, but yeah, they're all good phones. Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't really talk about the U.S. election yet.
Okay.
I know that's been a couple of months ago, but
yeah. Well, let's spend a few minutes talking about that before we close up for the day.
Yeah. So as everyone, of course, knows, Trump won the election, and the Democrats were just shocked. They didn't know what hit them, and it was obvious to those of us who were paying attention that Trump was going to win because everything the Biden administration did was just a disaster. I mean, the economy was a mess. Inflation was out of control for a while here, and the homeless population shot up, and all of the it was not so much just something Biden per se did, but rather he just happened to be in that situation, and Trump was in a different situation. So, of course, Trump was president when the pandemic started, and so while Trump was in office, all of these programs were put into place to protect workers while they couldn't go to work, and so on and so forth. And lots of people were getting Medicaid and other government benefits that they hadn't been getting before. And there was a moratorium on evictions. There was a moratorium for a while on rent. And all of that was ended under the Biden administration. And that, along with the supply chain problems, and then the after effects of the Ukraine war and the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines by the Biden administration, all of that created enormous inflation. So the economy just was did not do well under Biden, and they didn't even admit it. They were trying to gaslight us and convince us, oh, the economy's fine. Look how low the unemployment rate is. And people were saying, like, but I have to pay $1,500 a month for a low-end apartment. What are you talking about? The economy is not fine. I'm drowning in debt for medical bills or student loans, and you're not doing anything about it. So, Trump benefited from that. And then, of course, the Gaza genocide didn't help Biden. And it was interesting in Michigan, where my wife is from, in Dearborn and various other cities or towns in the Detroit area, there's a very large Muslim and Arab American population. Michigan has the largest Arab American population in the United States. And Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, got something like 20% of the vote in Dearborn, Michigan. And as most of your viewers, I'm sure, know, in general, third-party candidates, including Jill Stein overall and nationally, don't do well in the United States because they're kept off of the ballot in a lot of states. They're not allowed on national TV. They're not allowed in debates. And so it's impossible for a third-party candidate these days to get elected to higher office in the United States. But in areas where there were large Arab American or Muslim populations, Jill Stein did very well. So that was kind of interesting.
It is interesting, but the overall result was something like less than 1% of the overall vote for the country, wasn't it? She didn't. I was a little surprised she didn't do better than she did.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like the states where some of the states where she was kept off of the ballot were very large states. So the Greens were not allowed to appear on a ballot line in New York or Illinois, which are two of the biggest states in the country. And there were several other states that they were expecting to be on the ballot, but the Democrats spent more money trying to keep the Greens off of the ballot in the presidential race than the Greens spent on the presidential campaign. So
how can that possibly be democratic then?
Yeah, I mean,
you left.
Yeah, we don't live in a democracy here, as you know. I assume you're familiar with the Princeton University study from a few years back that found that literally ordinary Americans have no influence on the government's policies. The rich have enormous influence, and average Americans have little to no influence on government policy. So, we had these huge protests in 2020 over George Floyd and various other people being killed by the police who, were not being violent in any way. You had like 20 million people total at one time or another protesting over a couple of months period there in summer of 2020. And, they were demanding that funding be cut from the police and, reallocated to social services, which are better trained to deal with, people who are having, like psychological problems or what have you. They'll help people rather than shooting them. In fact, what happened was that the government raised police budgets. So big cities like New York and Los Angeles spend more money on their police departments than many, many countries in the world spend on their military. Just one city spending more money on their police department.
Interesting. There was a paper done quite recently on how much America spends on policing and corrections, which corrections, of course, means punishment. It doesn't mean correction at all. It means punishment, imprisonment. And the amount that you spend is actually more than China. On your internal policing, the amount you spend is more than China spends on its defense. And China's defense budget is the second in the world. But the money America spends on internally policing its own people is more than China spends on defending its entire country, which is really interesting.
I just got through reading a book on the Tiananmen massacre, and the author was comparing the way that the Chinese government and police and military and so forth responded to the protests in Beijing and elsewhere, to the way that American police responded to the Occupy Wall Street protests that took place, in the early 2010s, just after the Great Recession, and you point out that there was vastly more police brutality against unarmed people, at least from what we know about what happened in Beijing, was vastly less violence against unarmed people in that than there was in the United States during the Occupy Wall Street protests. So there were people killed in the Occupy Wall Street protests. There were thousands of people injured, thousands of people arrested. Some of them hit with pretty serious charges who weren't doing anything wrong, really. So there was an effort by the Obama administration and the government in general to just totally repress that movement, which of course was just demanding fair treatment for America's working class. And they were like, we can't have this. We got to keep our boot on your neck. Too bad.
How big is America's working class now?
You mean people who are no longer middle class?
Yeah.
Well, I've seen a study that says that more than half of Americans don't have $500 in their bank account, so they are unable to afford, a minor emergency. They just don't have the funds for that. So basically, a lot of Americans are one paycheck away from being homeless.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there is no homelessness in China?
Yeah, none.
None. I mean, you will find people living in the streets in China. There's no question about that. It does exist, but they're not homeless people. They're people who have moved from their homes, maybe for work. Maybe some of them they've slipped through the cracks in the mental health system. The mental health system here is not very well developed. The disability system is getting much better developed than it was when I came here. And my wife and I have been involved in that, so we know this. But the mental health system is not very well developed, and people do fall through the cracks, and we find them homeless. But what the police do when they find them is they send them home. They all have a place that they can call home, so they get sent home. Of course, if you just find this random guy walking in the streets and he's got no identification, he doesn't know who he is, then you've got a problem. But you do have homeless people, but it's very rare. You don't have homeless encampments. We don't have tent cities. We don't have people living in cars. I mean, if you're poor in China, you don't have a car. It's as simple as that. And that's one of the interesting things. That cars don't get stolen in China because the criminal fraternity aren't rich enough to afford to learn to drive. It costs a lot of money to learn to drive in China. So they don't steal cars because they don't know how to. It's as simple as that. The car theft is virtually non-existent here. Street crime is non-existent. It's a very different world we're living in. Very different.
For sure. Yeah. I was hearing, I heard something interesting the other day. It said that if you buy an electric vehicle in China, you can get a license plate for free. But if you buy a gas-powered vehicle, it costs you a lot of money.
No, it's not true. I don't know where that it was on Red Note. There was a myth about this. You do not get free registration, free insurance, anything like that, no matter what. There may have been one city. There's a city in Guangxi. I can't remember the name of the city where they make these little Wuling cars. They're very, very small, like smart cars, but much cheaper, very, very cheap. For about $7,000 or $8,000 you can have one of these things on the road. They're very cheap, and they may have had a system because that city is full. There's hardly any motorbikes. Almost everyone can afford one of these little cars. If you can afford a motorbike, you can probably afford one of these cars, and their registration is very cheap for that. So you've got a lot of stuff going on like that, but I don't think there's anywhere where registration of your car is free. They might give you the number plate for free, but you still got to register the car. You know,
Yeah.
it's not a free system, and they do
Uh,
pay. When you
well,
insure a
so
car
what
here,
are the incentives that the government provides for people to get electric cars? Because I
they
know
don't need to
that.
provide. The government doesn't need to provide incentives for people to get it because it's so much cheaper to have one. Yeah, it costs a little
Mhm.
more to buy one, but it's so
Yeah.
much cheaper to have one. And
Right.
once
Yeah.
you're running it, there's virtually you've got if you have an internal combustion ICE engine, then you've got literally thousands of moving parts. You've got
Yeah.
tens of moving parts in this thing. It's really so maintenance free. It is so
Yeah.
easy to operate, and it costs you something like 17 RMB, $3, less than $3 to charge it up fully. Most people can charge it up overnight, so they don't have to. I mean, if they're on a long journey, then you've got to park it up somewhere, charge it up, and leave it for 20 minutes or 30 minutes.
Mhm.
Go have a cup of coffee, cup of tea, whatever it is that you do. Go to the toilet. When you come back, it's charged. Many of
Mhm.
them have battery swaps. Fernando, my friend, has a Neo, and he has battery swap for life. It takes him 3 minutes to swap the battery. So he travels
Yeah.
500
I've heard.
kilometers, swaps the battery out, travels another 500 kilometers. So you don't need to incentivize the people. The greatest incentive, people want to do this because, and I just made a video about this a few days ago, the blue skies. When you look up in the sky during the day and you can see puffy white clouds and beautiful blue and the sun is streaming down, and you think, well, this wasn't like this 20 years ago.
Right.
I was following a bus on my bike the other day, thinking to
Mhm.
myself, Jesus, I'm glad this bus doesn't have an exhaust pipe, because I was right up close to where the exhaust pipe would be, and I'd be breathing diesel fumes if I was following that bus 20 years ago. No need to do
I
that now.
saw my
That's what,
first electric bus here in Bloomington the other day.
right.
Hallelujah.
Okay. Where was it made?
Um, Probably China. I don't know. I don't know. I'll have to check into it.
Yeah, you've seen one electric bus. I haven't seen a diesel bus in months, years, probably.
Yeah, I
But
think
the
all of them are
intercity
electric
buses,
now.
yeah, the intercity buses are all diesel, but the city buses, the local transportation in our city, in every city that I've been to recently, all the local buses are electric.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Anyway, I think it's time we got going. It's 11 o'clock
Yeah.
my time. It's getting late your time, so we better think about. We got to the end 90 minutes point, which is what we thought was a good time, and
Yeah.
we've covered Trump's election. We've covered some of Trump's actions, one of which I agree with, but most of which I don't.
Yeah.
We've covered Syria. We've covered pretty much everything that we wanted to cover. So, how about we call it a day?
All right, that sounds good.
All right.
And if that's okay with you, I just wanted to stay on with you for a couple of minutes after to run a couple of things
Sure.
by you.
Where can people find you before we go?
I'm at the Bitter Pill on YouTube and
Mhm.
at Lefty Vegan on X. You can also find me on Xiaohongshu and Facebook and so forth, but I don't go. I'm mainly on X as far as social media. Um,
What's your name on the Chinese social media?
just my name, Jeff Melton.
Jeff Melton. One word?
Um, I don't know what the at is actually. Come to think of it,
Okay. Well,
does that even show
on
up? I
Xiaohongshu.
can't remember.
Okay, so just people can look for Jeff Melton on Xiaohongshu,
Yeah.
and that's that one.
Yes.
Oh, there. Yeah, Jeff Melton. Oh, sorry. My pad's a little sticky. Jeff Melton on Xiaohongshu, right? And
I guess. Yeah. At the Bitter Pill on YouTube.
Yeah. So the bitter pill is showing there. I've put the bitter pill on the screen and Jeff Melton on Xiaohongshu, so people can find you there. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. We hit the 100 viewers, which was a good day today for this time of the morning. And I think in China it's a work day today. I don't work, so it's not really for me. Anyway, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I'd like to thank you, Jeff, and we'll catch up with everyone the next time.
Okay, and